Hello and welcome to Journeys in Transformation Analytics. This is Amaresh Tripathy. I run the analytics business at Genpact. And with me today, I have Doug Hague, who's the Executive Director of the School of Data Science at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Doug, welcome again and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Amaresh.
So Doug, in the last episode, we were just chatting about models, governance of those models, and how you can think about scaling talent. I mean, it came from we started talking about the scaling of talent in terms of like some experts versus with some people with a group of people who are probably semi-experts kind of doing that. How do you see this is a topic where we are passionate about because we do for our banking clients, we see kind of very sophisticated mechanisms and structures because of regulations on how model development is done and managed, right? And that entire discipline is pretty much absent everywhere else, every other industry. How do you see the whole thing evolving?
Yeah, I agree with you. And having run some of those model risk management groups within the financial world, when I came out and now in academia and been working with other industries, it's a little bit shocking because monitoring your models, they do decay, right? Everybody knows, oh yeah, once I build a model, it'll decay over time, but then nobody measures it. And so they're actually adding risk to their corporations and they're missing the efficiencies that they originally would have thought because they're not monitoring and keeping the models up to date. And there are auto-tuning models and that, and then you've got to watch the drift of the variables in. So no matter what kind of modeling you do, this applies. But the monitoring of the models is the most important thing, but there's also are you validating and ensuring that it's an appropriate use of the mathematics, as well as, what goes wrong when it fails. We went through a whole crisis this last 18 months or year to 18 months around COVID. A lot of models broke. Yes. And people were scrambling to do that, but having a contingency plan to know what you're going to do is critical. And all the services, I think about this all the time now, in how you actually manage it. And the leading edge of this, I'll go one step farther, is how are you actually checking for fairness and bias? And so one of the things that we're working with both here at the university as well as with our industry partners is really how is bias and fairness being checked? Is it being checked by your model developers? Is it being checked outside? In the financial industry, you can't use a lot of the protected variables in your development, so your developers don't even have access. So how do you actually manage that process to understand that you're being fair and you're not producing biased results and having disparate impacts?
Do you see regulations and model risk management coming to other industries beyond financial services?
I think if they're the model risk management practices, let's just call them best practices and not necessarily every practice that's in the financial services, but the best practices. If the other industries don't adopt these, I think the regulations will eventually come. It may take a while.
Yeah.
But especially if you're already regulated, like healthcare is heavily regulated already. If they're not starting to monitor and manage their models in a proactive manner, then they're going to get regulated in, and that won't necessarily be the best thing for everyone. But at least they'll be doing it, right? I would like them to see just adopted on a volunteer basis.
And Doug, you brought up the topic of you said the voluntary basis. What's really interesting, I have to share an anecdote. I was talking to one of the experts actually in this field, and he basically said what would be ethics in the US would be regulations in the EU, basically.
Yeah. Well, that's a trustworthy AI guidelines, right, in the EU, and adopting those trustworthy AI is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah. And do you see, so two related questions. One is the role of ethics and fairness. Do you think it will come in with the same structure as a model risk management, kind of within the same infrastructure? Or will it be like kind of how healthcare, like how hospitals do like ethics and boards and reviews, which is slightly different.
They have your internal review boards and that type of thing. I think, depending upon your industry, I would hope that it would fit into your current practices. So if you already have an IRB set up, internal review board, and that's where you could do some of your model risk management, could be through your IRB. I'm not saying you have to adopt model validation and model risk management teams in every industry. it should fit within the business process and workflows of your current culture and business in your industry. So if you have IRBs, it's a simple add there. If you already have model risk management, then you add your bias and fairness evaluations to your MRM process and workflow that you already have.
Yeah. And what's been I mean, you've talked to like analytics leaders across industries, like whether it's a retailer, whether it's like some of the other industries, where they are like, I mean, in some ways they're getting started in the journey, right? I mean, they're scrambling for talent. I mean, the technology and everything, and then you kind of go and add. Oh, now you have to think about fairness and you have to think about ethics. I mean, they can't get the basics done at times.
That's right.
How does an analytics leader manage both aspects of this simultaneously?
Yeah, so what I would talk to them about is most of the people that have adopted this have adopted it through reputational risk, headline news, right? And so they get slapped. And so all of a sudden they're getting bad press, and the CEOs and the executives say, how are we going to fix this? And then it lands on the developers and the model people to actually do it. Hopefully you can actually use examples that have already happened to talk to your executive team and say, look, we need to do some of this so it doesn't happen to us. And that's the proactive way that I would recommend going about it. Because if you go in there and say, I need to adopt the financial industry model of model risk management, and oh, by the way, they have 500 people in large companies working on this, you're never going to get that funded.
Got it.
Right? And so how do you bring that in? And really it's through the risk, and it's headline risk that you're going to be selling. And if there's a small event, then you use that as leverage to say, hey, this one was small. It could have been much worse. So let's actually start looking at this ahead of time.
That's really fascinating, and it's an area where I think it will evolve a lot. What are you doing with kind of the data scientists that you're training for tomorrow? How are you kind of incorporating it into the curriculum or into the classroom? Because obviously when you and I started, I mean, this wasn't even a topic.
This wasn't. So that's a great question. And actually it's one of those things that I think benefits the university I'm at, is having the industry perspective, bringing model risk management into the curriculum. So we're looking to do that. We are developing special topics courses. The first one we're developing and actually teach next fall is on model governance, or not model governance, data governance. Most programs don't teach anything about data governance. There's a little bit of data quality and privacy concerns, but you're really not teaching about governance. And so we're actually going to start teaching a class next fall on the process of governance, which is a practice that's been developed in industry and not in university.
Interesting.
And then we're going to get to the model risk management. I have to do that, but I need to find the time.
Got it. No, any interesting technologies or anything evolving, any novel approaches evolving in this space, the world of ethics and.
It is really it's almost a theoretical framework of how to approach ethics. A lot of our practitioners today approach it from a mathematical bias aspect. So I've got my different races, African American, Latinx, white, Caucasian, and then we'll see if our model performs the same on all of them. That's one way, but it's a very mathematical way to do bias, right? Is that actually fair?
Right.
Fairness is a societal concept. It isn't a mathematical concept. And so this interaction between the mathematics and am I treating everybody exactly the same is the difference between equality and equity.
Right.
And so as you're working through this, I don't think we know the answer yet, but there's a lot of work. And that's why we have philosophers within the School of Data Science to help us work through kind of this logical framework. And then people like me that have been in industry to try and translate that to say, hey, here's a practice you can actually adopt in industry.
What a fascinating concept, and I mean, it is a lot of work to be done, and I mean, that's probably the best part about School of Data Science. It's a year old in some ways, and in some ways from maturity. There's so much more to go there. So, but thank you, Doug, so much for coming and sharing some of the insights.
Appreciate it, Amaresh.